Good afternoon. Hope you're having a good Friday and you're looking forward to the weekend. It's me, Lance Nilsson from the Outcast Creative. Just to remind you, this is just a short gut reaction review of episode 4 of Masters of the Air. I'll be doing a much longer review with several guests on my channel this Sunday at 9 o'clock. I've also got an episode of Chew the Fat tomorrow on 2 Australian films. The Dish and The Castle. And then on Tuesday, I have an interview with Ron Underwood, who is the director of the film Tremors and City Slickers. Currently, he works on the Walking Dead franchise. But let's get back to Masters of the Air. So look, if you've seen my other reviews on the show, you'll know that on the whole, I quite like this show. I've been pretty pleased with what I've seen so far. And you know, it's on the whole, it's been good. I have had some gripes, and if you watch my other episodes, you can see what those gripes are. But episode 4 for me is not a good episode. I'm sorry. For me, hi Anthony, nice to see you. Jamal, good to see you. For me, there's some problems with this episode, and I'm going to get into what they are. But it is an episode of highs and lows. There are some very good things about the episode, and I'm going to mention those too. Now, don't forget, I am going to go into this in more detail on Sunday, and we'll hear other people's views, not just my own. As usual, for the most part, the acting is the standards pretty high. There's some guest actors coming into the show for the first time. A lot of them British, playing American roles. They all do perfectly well. There's a couple of standouts that I really think are going to go on to have good careers. So I don't have any issue with that. That's all fine. The narrative that you get in this episode is split into 3 sections. You have the ongoing storyline about 2 characters who were shot down during the Schweinfurt raid in episode 3. And we follow their story with the Belgian and French resistance and their journey to get back to the UK. I'm going to come back to that storyline in a moment. The second thing is the arrival of new pilots coming on the base. Several characters are established, a number of new young fresh faces, lots of comments on how from the original 30 bombers that flew over, there's only 12 original crews remaining. They're going back to Bremen to bomb the submarine pens again and try and carry out the mission successfully this time. There's also the episode starts with people waiting for a bomber to come in that's completed its 25th mission, which means the crew gets to go home. So I'm going to get into a couple of spoilers here. So if you don't want any spoilers and you haven't seen the episode, you should probably stop watching now. On the whole, I found that the things that were wrong with the episode were so glaring that it made it disappointing for me. This isn't an action episode, so we don't see a mission. I have no problem with that. I'm sure History Bro is going to be complaining about that on Sunday. I don't have a problem with that per se. There's a lot about build up to the mission, coming back from the mission, that sort of thing. Discussion of casualties and objectives and so forth. In the meantime, the role played by Callum Turner, and he's exceptionally good in the role. He gets a 2-day pass to London because he's kind of flak happy, as it's said, and he goes on a, I guess you could say, a sort of all-night bender. Meets up with a Polish widow who escaped to England, whose late husband was also a pilot. At first, this story all felt very contrived, but actually I quite liked it in the end. I quite liked the little arc with them, and found that was quite realistic. There's a whole storyline of her not wanting to commit to anything because he could be the next person dead in the field and so on, and them both kind of giving each other kind of comfort. It's not just a physical thing, but a bit more than that. But they understand each other and they connect in that level. I found all of that quite plausible, and that was all perfectly fine. Where the film really lets itself down is with the whole, we're in France, we're in Belgium, these are the resistance narrative. Whilst there was kind of an interrogation scene to check that the Americans were legit Americans and to suss out any potential infiltrators, all of that stuff. That's all fine. What was not good were the following. So the biggest gripe I have of all is you have 2 prisoners of war on a train in Paris, and for whatever reason, their escort decides that she's got to go pee-pee, as she says, just as the train is coming into the station. Why she decided to do this and abandon her 2 people she was escorting, I found that kind of untenable. Surely she could have gone to the bathroom before the train came into the biggest station in France, with the biggest presence of German military, SS. You would have had lots of collaborators, all of this kind of thing. So then there's a bit of an incident that occurs on the train. I found that incident was quite unrealistic, and I don't think it actually happened in reality. One of the Allied soldiers panics. He runs through the train as though he's about to get off. This brings loads of attention to him and almost certainly would have resulted in a collaborator. And there were loads of them in Paris. You're talking a huge percentage of the population giving a German officer on a tap and pointing to him and getting a cash reward. This sort of thing went on all the time. Even if that hadn't happened, let's put that aside. Let's put that to one side for a second. If that hadn't happened, you then have 2 characters, one French, one downed American soldier, airman, arguing in a car with the door open, whilst other people that they don't know are going past and they're having the argument in English. I'm sorry, I have to call total bullshit on that scene. That scene is bullshit. That would never happen. They would never take that risk and have that conversation in English in a crowded train station whilst the train is in the station, whilst people are going past them in the corridor. You've got 2 extras that go past them in the corridor. This scene is nonsense. It's absolute historical nonsense. They would have immediately been identified by other people in the train. You don't know where collaborators are going to be. You'd never have a conversation like that when someone's walking past you that you don't know. It's rubbish. It's the sort of thing that would happen in a film in the 1950s. I know, listen, being a bit of a historian and having written scripts set in World War II, it is often the case that truth is often stranger than fiction, and strange things do happen which can seem implausible or unbelievable, but they turn out that the reality is true. However, unless someone is going to point me to a record that actually says that this conversation took place on this train, I honestly call bullshit on this. These guys would have been identified. They would have been arrested if the circumstances depicted in the show happened. Now, okay, one could argue, well, it's a television show. It's not a documentary. It's supposed to be dramatic. There will be some dramatic license taken here and there. Sure. The fact that this guy arrives in the station in the car and starts talking to these 2 downed airmen in French, and they haven't got a clue what he's talking about, and they're not sure what to do. That situation is tense enough. We don't need some guy getting up, suddenly panicking, running through a train. We don't need this other conversation to have taken place. All we needed was for her to tell the guy to shut up, escort him back to the carriage, and sit him down. And that conversation could have happened later once the train was on the move. The door to the car was shut, and they had some sense of security, some sense of sound insulation. It just wasn't believable in the circumstances that you've presented to us that would have happened. I just didn't believe it. And that really annoyed me, that in a show of this quality, the writing and the direction could be that poor. So I have a big problem with that. I mean, look, in the grand scheme of the whole show, if the rest of the show is amazing, and I have liked it so far, it's not going to make me think that the show's rubbish. But That was my main gripe. I've got a couple of others, and I'll tell you what they are. Now, we know that the show was predominantly shot in the UK because it was one of the first shows to restart during COVID. It got partly shut down during COVID. There was restarts and stops and all the rest of it. So it wasn't like they could get a second unit together very easily and go and shoot some stuff in France. Okay, right, fair enough. But you have scenes in this particular episode where people are cycling through small villages in the French countryside or small villages in Flanders in Belgium, and we've got a scene with someone cycling past a canal, and that all looks very nice. But then we get shots where people cycle into villages, and immediately it all looks wrong. So British villages have a very specific look from that time period. They have a very specific design of walls. They have a very specific design of brickwork. Now, a lot of people say that the French didn't use brick work the same way as us in the 1940s. That's not true. They did, but just not as frequently or not as common. And houses in particular regions of France and particular regions of Belgium during this period look a certain way. The shutters have a certain color and so on. But in particular, some of the things that are different about French and Belgian architecture from the 1940s are the look of things like chimneys on the houses. British chimneys have a very particular look in the 1940s. French chimneys are different. Okay, Dutch chimneys have a different look. The style of the shape of the roofs of Dutch, Belgium houses and even French houses near the Belgian border have a very particular type of look. You can still go to these villages and you can see villages that are largely intact that got skipped over during the conflict in World War II, weren't all flattened to the ground. You know, you can go and see churches that have got bullet holes in them and things like this. There are villages that are completely as they were from the 1940s. Sure, they might have TV aerials and satellite dishes and people might have built extensions and things, but you can see this architecture. It's there to be found. It's very easy to find it. Plus, you can look at photos of the time, photos, postcards, and so on. What they've done is they've shot these scenes in an English village, and then they've CGI'd some chimneys and bits and bobs and things to just kind of, you know, take out modernisms and stuff like that. It looks nothing like Europe. Okay. Immediately, I'm thinking, where's this supposed to be? They put a sign up on the screen, Flanders, Belgium, and okay, we've got a canal, and that's all lovely. But as soon as we get into this town, get into this village, and it's not a very long scene, it just doesn't look like Europe. It doesn't look like Belgium. It doesn't look like France. These places have a very specific look. The walls have a very specific look. I get it. You're stuck in the UK, and you've got limitations in terms of what you can do. But there are small details that would have been easy to correct with the huge amount of CGI that's used in this show, and they use it a lot, to make these villages look French, to make these villages look Belgian, and they don't, unfortunately. So that was another gripe. I find that the storyline of the men shot down behind the lines is quite weak, I'll be honest. And I'm much more interested with this show in the relationship between the men, their missions, and also the relations that they have with the environment around them back in the UK. So far, we've had one scene of them interacting with British airmen, you know, Captain Smithington Smythe. I'm going to have some 50 cuffs with you and all that, which was a bit naff, let's face it. And then quite a few things with the relationship with the English girls that worked on the base or lived near the base, for example, and the difficulties that posed and how people became attached or transient one way or the other with those relationships. All of that stuff is quite well done. There's the other scenes that are in this episode are, I think, for the most part, are really good. But the big problem I have with episode 4 is that the things that are wrong with it really let it down. And for me, and I don't know if anyone else has seen it with the people that are watching, if you want to put a comment in the chat about your own thoughts, please do. But for me, the things that let this episode down were big. And I can only give this episode 5 out of 10 because the stuff with the Resistance storyline, which felt fictional, which felt wrong, which didn't fit, which just felt ludicrous, and just felt like these guys would have been captured, all felt just really unreal. It took me out of the episode, and then also so did the production design, which I just felt looked wrong. And I just didn't feel, and the production design on this show, just to give them credit, the art director, production designer, etc., is extremely high. The standard is extremely good. But I don't know what happened here. I guess it was a case of make the best in lockdown, and this is what our Belgian village is going to look like. But yeah, a lot of casualties in this episode. A lot of faces disappear. That stuff is well done. I have a feeling we're going to get a flashback episode, and we're going to get to see what happened to one particular air crew later in the show. So I do feel like we're going to flash back to the raid. We don't see the raid in this episode. We see the people coming back from it, and I have a feeling we're gonna go back to this at some point and see what happened to some of those characters whose fate at the moment remains unknown. Look, I enjoyed the episode, but it's just my gripes with it. If you're tuning in now, you go back and watch the earlier part of the review. My gripes with it, just I really felt let it down. And on a show with the names attached to this project, Spielberg, Hanks, HBO, etc., Apple, it's sorry, I think it is only Apple Plus. I don't think it is a co-production with HBO, is it? But nevertheless, standards have been pretty high on this show so far. So I was just quite surprised that some very poor writing dynamics really let it down on episode 4. So for me, this episode 4, really, because of those things, is a 5 out of 10. Take those things out, I guess it's a 7, but I can't take those things out because they're in the show. So, all right, I'm going to be talking about this more in depth on Sunday with the inside man who worked on the show, History Bro, who of course is a historian. The Critical Drinker might be dropping into that. I'll have Blue Collar Loser on the panel as well, and I'll be listening to the thoughts of my guests and hearing what they thought about this episode. Don't forget, also on Tuesday, I am interviewing Ron Underwood, who is the director of Tremors, guys. He is currently working on the Walking Dead franchise. This is also the man who directed City Slickers with Billy Crystal, if you remember that excellent comedy from the early 90s, I think it came out. So this is some of Ron Underwood's work here. I'm interviewing him on Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the evening. It is quite late because he's in Los Angeles, so he is 8 hours behind. I have to work around his commitments. You definitely want to check out this show because I'm going to have a couple of very cool surprise guests popping in, and my co-host will also be film director Matthew Holmes. So the two of us will be interviewing Ron Underwood Tuesday, 10 p.m. And then I've also got an episode of Chew the Fat tomorrow night where I'm reviewing a couple of older films, very much out of the World War II ballpark for those people who are only interested in the World War II stuff. This may not be your bag, but these two films are excellent. I highly recommend them. We're going to be talking about them in some detail tomorrow at 9 p.m. So 9 p.m. tomorrow, Chew the Fat on the Dish and The Castle, two Australian comedies. 9 p.m. on Sunday for my more in-depth Masters of the Air review and discussion with my panel. And then instead of the regular Nielsen ratings on Tuesday, I have the interview with Ron Underwood. Until then, guys, that's it from me. Thanks very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. Watch my other industry interviews. There are 53 of them on there now. I've also just booked my next guest, who is the editor of the comic 2000 AD. So I've got Stephen McManus coming in, who was the editor from Prog 77 to 500, the golden era of 2000 AD. All the best Judge Dredd stories, Strontium Dog, Robo Hunter, you know, Mach 1. You've got all of that stuff all happening under his watch. That's going to be a fantastic interview. That is later on in February, before the end of the month. That's it from me. Thanks very much for tuning in, and may God go with you.